Yes, ma'am.
It is March 15th, 2021, and you are listening to episode 31 of the Candid Clarinetist podcast. What's going on, everybody? Sam Rothstein here, acting principal clarinet with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra and host of the Candid Clarinetist podcast. I first wanted to apologize to everyone for not releasing any new episodes this past month. I've been busy with some other projects, as well as ramping up my practice time in preparation for the start of the Indianapolis Symphony season soon, so the podcast took a bit of a backseat for a while, but I look forward to producing some more episodes soon, and I wanted to reassure you that we are indeed not going anywhere, so you can look forward to some great content coming up soon. My guest for today is Chris Pell, who is the principal clarinetist of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. Prior to his appointment in Cincinnati, Chris was the principal clarinet of the Louisiana Philharmonic. Chris and I first met when we were fellows together at the Tanglewood Music Center, and I wanted to bring Chris on today to talk about expectations that he had before becoming a professional clarinetist versus what his experience has been for the first 10 or so years of his career. So, Chris, it's so nice to see you, buddy.
Oh, it's great to see you, too. It's really nice to be here, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So the first question I have for you is, how old were you and how much schooling did you have when you first got your job in Louisiana?
So I was 21. It was 2012, and it was right after was it right after or right before we were at Tanglewood together?
It was like a couple weeks after, if I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like the week after, and so I was 21 at that point, and that was the summer after my junior year or third year at Juilliard, and it was like 2 or 3 weeks before we went back to school in September. So and there was a hurricane about to hit.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I had flown into New Orleans and just stayed at a hotel that was kind of walking distance, but luckily I got a ride with Jason Schaefer.
Mm-hmm.
And Erin Fung, who now lives in Cincinnati with her husband, Chris Sales. He's a principal bassoon here, and Brad Whitfield. So Brad and Jason were at New World together, and Erin was also friends with them. So they asked if I would want to take a ride with them over to Houston and catch a flight the next morning instead of out of New Orleans because there was a hurricane. So kindly enough, they waited around, and we all went together and drove. It's like a 2-hour drive. I don't remember how long it is. It's not super long. So we just kind of drove throughout the night. And, but yeah, I didn't really have any expectations of winning an audition, especially at that point. And so I quickly had to figure out everything. I didn't have my driver's license yet. I only had a permit because I grew up in New York City. So my grandparents lived in Georgia, and so I would get to practice driving when I was down there, and only in the summers. So when I got off the plane that next morning, my grandpa took me straight to the DMV, and I got my license. Luckily, I don't know what would have happened if they didn't give it to me, and then I had to figure out where to live. I didn't know anything about New Orleans, so I just kind of picked an apartment that looked like it was going to be nice, and it turned out it was too far from where I needed to be, but I had no idea what the map of the city was or where to live. So there were a whole bunch of things that I was really not ready for at all, and I didn't have any friends who had gone through that situation yet. So
yeah. So can I back you up a little bit? When you were preparing for because I remember you were preparing for the audition when we were, the waning weeks of the festival. And what were your expectations about the audition? Had you taken an audition before? Were you okay, I'll just see how it goes? Or were you oh, if I get this job, I'm going to start working? What was the purpose for you, taking the audition? Were you just I'm ready to start my career? I'm just curious where your head was at that point in time.
I remember freshman year turning to my friend and being wouldn't it be really cool to get a job before you finish undergrad? And I guess kind of having that in the back of my head for some reason. I don't know exactly why. And so I had taken my first audition was Cleveland Opera, which is no longer a company, I don't think. And that was for third and bass. And I am horrible at the bass clarinet. So I was swiftly, actually, I didn't even play it. So it didn't even matter that I was terrible at the bass clarinet. I didn't play it in the first round, but I was swiftly asked to not play the clarinet again at that audition. And then a year later, that was after my sophomore year, I took the Knoxville acting principal audition, which Peter, what's his name?
Peter Kane.
Yes, Peter Kane won. And I was in the finals for that, and I was 19 or 20. I was 20, and everybody else was like late 20s. And I was like, wow, this is super easy. My second audition, and I'm already in the finals. Like, this is the easiest thing. So then I felt okay for the LPO one, and got that. And then like 3 weeks later, I took LA Principal. That was the first one that they took, and immediately didn't advance. It was like 4 minutes of playing, and they're like, thanks, that was terrible. And from that point on, it was a drought of about 14 auditions that I didn't advance. And so it was kind of a roller coaster right away, and thinking that it was going to be something totally different than it turned out to be. And thinking, I was like, wow, if I just show up at the auditions, I get what I want. And then immediately I learned that wasn't the case.
Yeah, well, I think there's actually something to this sort of like blind, just, you don't know any better kind of thing, because you're just like, oh, okay, whatever, sure, I'm in the finals, where you don't actually know how hard it is to create that consistency and results throughout your career, which it seems like you discovered as you were, playing this job, and you were just like, okay, whoa, like it was easy, and now it's not anymore, because you start to sort of dig deeper into it a little bit more and figure out sort of the nuances in audition taking. That's really cool. So you said you needed to get a driver's license. That was like your first main thing. Yeah. But I think I'm just curious, like, so you're 21 years old in the Louisiana Philharmonic. You're a principal player. Your colleagues are probably for the most part a good deal older than you. I know. I think it wasn't Jacqueline there with you, Jacqueline Rainey, and
yeah,
was Andrew there as well?
The next year, and then Andrew started the next year.
Yeah, Andrew Brady, who's a bassoonist. He's now with the Atlanta Symphony. So that was probably nice to have some of those colleagues next to you that you were familiar with, and sort of your similar age. But I'm imagining that, like, when you first showed up, bright-eyed, bushy tail, like, it wasn't probably what you thought it was going to be in a lot of respects. And I'm just curious, like, what was like the biggest lesson you learned your first year, sort of going through that?
I think it was probably just in the first few weeks of being used to rehearsal schedules of college or even music festivals where you would rehearse like one or two movements of something on the first day. So I remember our first concert was Scheherazade and Ravel, both hand piano concerto.
Both hand, what is it? Both hand piano. Yeah,
not the left hand.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the G major.
Yeah, and some other things, and I was like, okay, we'll probably just do like a couple movements, harder movements of Scheherazade, and it was like the entire program, and I was fully not prepared because I was also trying to get ready for an audition at the same time. So that was one of the biggest things. Like, you just have to have all of the music prepared right away, which now sounds silly to even have to say that, but at the time in school, you do one or two movements per rehearsal, and it's laid out very clearly. But then in a professional situation, you don't have enough time you don't have 13 rehearsals.
Yeah, and you don't know, and the thing is, like, you don't know until you get there, right? Because it's like, all you ever knew up to that point was like, okay, we rehearse a piece to death for 3 months, and then we play a concert. And here it's like, well, you might have one or two full programs every week that you just need to boom, 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 and that's definitely a good lesson to learn early on, that you need to be like really on top of everything.
Yeah. Well, I had those experiences in college, and then also my teacher, John Manassi, plays at a number of orchestras in New York City. And so he's able to kindly give out freelance work pretty steadily. And every now and then I would be a lucky benefactor of that generosity.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So in the summers, he plays American Ballet Theater, and there are 8 shows a week. And, maybe after the 6th show, he'd be like, would you mind coming in and doing the 7th or 8th show? And there were a couple other students who would do that as well. And so I had, on one hand, the experiences of at Juilliard where you would work on something for 13 rehearsals, and then at ABT, it would be like 2 days before, hey, can you just show up and play the second part for Swan Lake? And of course, you don't have the music, and each ballet company does it differently. So that was a totally different experience. So there was nothing ever really in the middle. Like I never subbed a week at the Phil or with the Met. I never did like a production with the Met or anything, and got used to kind of what a professional arc is for a concert. So it was either all or nothing. So
yeah. And what do you think? Minus the musical side of it, but interpersonally, like interacting with other professional musicians, what challenges did you encounter in that regard? Like I'll share first so you don't feel exposed here. But like so for me, like one of the regrets that I've had is, I'm kind of a fun, guy. Like I joke about things, and one of the things I learned early on is like not everyone at work wants to be your friend, And so like I would say some things to some people that like maybe I would say at a party or just like, if I'm hanging out at a restaurant and whatever. But some people just don't want that. And I think you have to be really respectful of other people's like how they view their work. And I think that's something that I learned early on was like, okay, not everyone wants to be best friends with me. This isn't like social band time. This is your job. And so that's a lesson that I learned. So I'm curious to hear what you learned in that respect.
That's a hard lesson, and it sounds like that was maybe not a fun lesson to learn.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was an important lesson to learn for sure. And like I said, like I never got it in really like a negative. And sometimes like I would say something and I would have really nice colleagues who, they see me as a young guy and they're like, hey, like, some people just aren't, that way, and that's okay. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like I didn't know that. Thanks for pointing that out. So I was fortunate to have those kind of mentors as I grew up, through the orchestra ranks. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I feel like there are all sorts of things that get pointed out to you that maybe we weren't aware of, and I kind of adopted this posture of sitting where I really slouch, and I've tried to get rid of it when I'm at work, but for me, it's really comfortable while I'm practicing. And it makes me feel like my air is doing a certain thing, and like it's just comforting. It doesn't feel like a lazy approach or anything. It doesn't feel like that sort of thing. But at work, it doesn't look good. And so something like that comes off badly. I'm sure I've said tons of things that like I wish I wouldn't have said at work. One thing that I struggle with, and I guess I've always kind of been like this, is when I feel like the quality of something isn't as good as it could be, I feel like I get really upset. And so something that I've tried to deal with is managing, like finding a balance between caring and getting really upset or being apathetic. Like there needs to be a middle ground where, and I guess that is kind of the balance that I'm looking for. I don't have any answers to that, but the more I think about it and talk about it, I think it helps me kind of just learn about myself and learn about how I interact with other people. But I guess more so than saying anything to anybody, it's been just like the internal monologue that I have going on throughout rehearsals or.
Absolutely. And I had it's a very interesting point that you bring up, because I've had the same experience where it's like, your first 2 or 3 years in an orchestra, like you're proving yourself, right? You want to prove yourself. And then after you prove yourself, you start to kind of get like frustrated with other people and
Hmm.
yourself at the same time. And I had a colleague once, he's our English horn player, and he pulled me aside. He's like, Sam, like, you gotta like chill. Like, you're gonna be doing this for 40 years. 40
Hmm.
years. If you get this upset over every single passage, every concert, you're gonna
Yeah.
drive yourself nuts. And the and actually, and not to use this person as an example, but one of your predecessors in Cincinnati, Richie Hawley, my
Hmm.
colleague, was colleagues with him in Charleston when he was
Hmm.
very young, and apparently Richie was struggling, and Richie, forgive me if you're listening to this episode, but apparently Richie was struggling with something. He was getting really frustrated, and his I think it was his second clarinetist or one of the colleagues around him just looked at him and said, "Kid, you got to let it go." You know, just like it's a long career, and if you
Yeah.
take every little thing personal and you beat yourself up over every little thing, or you get frustrated over everything that somebody else does, like you're just not going to last. I mean, mentally you're just not going to be. So that's interesting that you brought that up, because I've definitely felt the same way. And it does feel like this balance between apathy and like really caring, so it's a difficult balance to strike sometimes, I believe.
It's hard because us feeling so adamant about achieving the best quality that we can all the time is kind of what has helped us get to where we are. And growing up, like just talking to ourselves when we're practicing, it's like that. And so it's hard to unwire that from yourself when you're around other people, because it really doesn't come off well. It only makes people tense, and socially, it only goes downhill from there. So, I mean, it's something that I try to think about, and I'm really not perfect with it. So,
Oh yeah,
um,
I don't think anyone is, and it's I always, when stuff like that comes up, I always think to myself, okay, is it worth it to pick this battle today? Like, is this the right time to do this? And
mhm.
I will sit there and think about things for a while before I decide to act on it. Whereas before, I would usually just act and then probably regret the result of it, because, like you said, sometimes it gets tense or whatever. So that's a really great lesson, I think, for people to learn early on. And it sounds like you're still, as we all are, battling that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I feel like I struggle with is being defensive. Whenever I get comments, I feel like one of my primary ways to react is with by being defensive.
Hmm.
It's like, can that be shorter? It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe it was short enough, but like other people are playing whatever. It's like, or can it be louder? It's like, well, can they play softer? That sort of thing happens in my head right away, and I think it comes from wanting acknowledgement of like, oh, Chris, that was amazing. Would you mind doing it a little bit shorter? Oh, yeah, great. They love me. Like, why do I need that? Why is that a part of it? So
Yeah.
that's only ego. So I'm trying to get work on that as well, because that bleeds over into other parts of my life, and friendships, relationships. So it's never useful for me, and it just distracts from what the actual request was to begin with. So I guess those are the two main things that I try to deal with now, and I think I've always kind of felt them. But in terms of adjusting to being in the LPO from college, I had super nice colleagues, and
Yeah, that's
it
nice.
it was really easy. And it's a really young orchestra. There were a lot of people just like me were in college and took an audition just to try it out. It felt like a manageable audition to audition for, because it's a really low salary. It's like the lowest salary in the country, but it's filled with people who want to play as well as they possibly can. So it's this exciting energy all the time, and you don't even know if some weeks if you're going to be paid. So it kind of adds this excitement to everything. Whereas I think sometimes other groups can really take their pay for granted, or just their employment, their benefits, all that for granted, and you can sometimes hear it. So
Yeah.
luckily, everybody was super nice, and it made it easy. I didn't have any like awkward situations personally at that point. I mean, random things would happen later on.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so I felt like I had more searching that I had to do when I got here, um, compared to New Orleans. Just trying to figure out what my role was, and when you don't have tenure, you want to figure out how to fit in. And for me, I've always tried to figure out a way to fit in, and it can go too far, and I end up losing a sense of what I'm supposed to be doing, which is, as anybody on stage, you're supposed to be expressing yourself, and being as open as possible. And trying to fit in doesn't really lend itself to that whole paradigm. So trying to find a balance between that too. Playing well with other people, but also being a soloist, no matter what position you're playing. So, yeah, that was another thing that I had to work on.
Yeah, and I think too, it was nice of you to say that you had really, welcoming colleagues and stuff when you were in Louisiana, and I felt the same way, like when I was in Richmond, and frankly when I got to Indianapolis, and I think that that's kind of informed me how I want to treat younger colleagues when they come into orchestras. Is like I want to be what those people were to me to them,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that you feel the same way, where it's like you don't want to start this combative relationship, like someone's coming into your territory or whatever. That you want to welcome them and maybe teach them, guide them rather than like punishing them for whatever mistakes they may not even know that they're doing. So I think that's
Yeah.
that's a nice thing, and it goes along with like just a career in an orchestra. Like these orchestras go through these generational transitions, and I think that it's nice that you have the older guard that sort of trains the younger guard, and then you see the transition. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm kind of starting to get in the middle now. So I used to always be the youngest person in the orchestra, and now that's no longer the case. So,
well, it's been different in both orchestras, because in New Orleans, it felt like anybody who joined was trying to find the first audition that they could take to get out of it, just because of the financial insecurity of it, not because of the quality. And so it was a great orchestra to get to learn a ton of rep and play with good people, because it's a fully normal season. It's 9 months, and every week you're doing something, but everybody is trying to take auditions. And then here, as a couple new people have joined since I've been here, it's more about like welcoming them to the Midwest and being like, there are like really nice things about living here. That cost of living is super cheap. And I mean, I grew up in New York City and then lived in New Orleans, and I feel like everybody has always just kind of like poo-pooed the Midwest and been like, it's just boring. Like people hide their emotions, all of these things. And then I moved here and really enjoyed it. So it's been different here, welcoming new people. It's like, it's actually really nice here. Try to enjoy it. Like these are the fun spots to go to and the nice things to do here. So it's just been a little bit different, but was it kind of like that for you too?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely different. Like, so my first job was in Richmond, obviously. And, there is a different feeling with the smaller orchestras in terms of just, I think this, like you said, the smaller orchestras, a lot of people just kind of want to, it's their way to sort of make a living, but at the same time, they're not ready to live there. And then when you get to an orchestra the size of like Cincinnati or Indianapolis, it's just a different feeling, because it feels like there's people that, this is their home. It doesn't feel like this transient kind of, people are, okay, they're there now, but they're not wanting to be here. Now it's like, okay, people are here and they've been here for 30 years and this is their life. This is their career. And so it's definitely a different feeling. But in terms of the Midwest, like I grew up in the Midwest, so I'm very used to it.
Mean at all?
No, it wasn't mean at all.
Okay.
It's pretty rich coming from someone from New York City, though.
Oh, no, I mean, you've seen that New Yorker cover where it's like New York City and then the tiny little sliver of Jersey and then everything else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So along the same lines, I mean, how you touched on this briefly, but how obviously, like when you're in school, you practice and you take lessons and, you sometimes go to class. I mean, you go to class. But like literally your job is just to like get better at the clarinet, right?
Mhm.
And then when you're in a job like the Louisiana Philharmonic or the Richmond Symphony or whatever your job is, um, your job is your job, and that's your first, devotion is you got to be ready for work. And so, how
Mhm.
different was it for you when you were preparing for auditions while you were in school versus like, okay, I got to prepare for this audition, but I also like have to not get fired. I got to still produce at a high level in my position.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. That's kind of exactly how I felt. It was like taking an audition in school felt kind of like extracurricular.
Right.
And if there's time, prepare as much as you can. This is hopefully what I will get to do at some point once I graduate. But then there's so many more like financial and career implications of taking, or like hopes and aspirations are involved when you take them while you have a current job, because it feels like um, you're trading this experience, which you will most likely not succeed at, for like $800. And you'll gain a lot of experience that you can use maybe for the next audition. Um, but also you might have to give up a week of work to do it, or like you have to put stress on other people in your section to cover for you. All sorts of different things. Like it depends on if the music director's there that week, what program it is. There are all sorts of things that come into play that when you're in school, it's just like, can I please leave to go do this? And I'm like, sure. We can even help maybe pay for it too.
Right. It's an
So,
interesting point you bring up too, because like when I got to Indianapolis, I had my first ever experience where I like could not go to an audition. Like they would not let me go. And
mm,
there was no way that I could take it. And it was very hard for me to swallow because up to that point, and I'm very fortunate, like in Richmond, my music director is very understanding and just great, like great people all around. People made it work for me because they understood, the situation I was in. But in Indianapolis, it's like, "Dude, this is your job, dude. Like, go to work. And so it's just a
yeah.
different. It was a hard pill for me to swallow. I was like, oh, okay, we're in a different, you know, part of my life now.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. Once again, you put it perfectly, much better than I could have said it. It would have taken me like 4 times as long. So, um, yeah, in New Orleans, they were super understanding of it, and you just asked the personnel manager, and then there was a whole committee for it. There was a committee for everything, because when they restarted the orchestra, it was it's still musician owned, so everybody's salary is technically a share of the company.
Mhm.
So there is no 3-year uh, contract.
Right.
It just gradually changes every year. Basically, it stays the exact same if it doesn't go up by 1% or 2. Um, so anyways, whenever you ask for time off, it goes to a whole committee of musicians that vote on whether you can have this time off. And same with programming. There's a whole team of musicians that do the programming along with the head artistic planner. And so there's usually like one administrator for that part of the behind the scenes of the orchestra, and then like a whole committee of musicians to do it. So that was also different. People could judge whether or not you deserve time off to take this audition versus that audition, or this gig versus that one. A Broadway show would come through town, and it's like, well, which one do you prefer to give time off for, a Broadway show, or like for someone to go take an audition or get a surgery? And it was totally different than it is here. You just ask the personnel manager, and they decide.
Yeah.
Um, so, but there are benefits to both ways of doing it.
Yeah. That's
I
cool.
don't
That's really
know
cool.
what that tangent was, but
No, no, it's in Louisiana is just so different just because it is like I mean I really honestly don't understand it, so I'm not going to try to explain it. I think you explained it the best way anyone
mm,
probably could, where it's like when they restructured. Just for a little bit of background, I think it was when was it after
like 90,
Katrina?
91.
Oh, it
No,
was
it was before
before
that.
that. Okay. So before that, they restructured and then it became like a musician owned entity rather than like
Hmm.
the model that we're all used to. So, if anyone's interested, it's kind of interesting to find out about it. I'm sure there's information online that you could find out about how exactly that works. But I mean, it's kind of cool that the musicians have say in a lot of aspects of the
Yeah,
organization. It's unique for sure in our industry.
and everything is transparent. Um,
Yeah.
there are musicians on the finance committee. along with whoever the CFO is at that time. And so everything is known by everybody. And there's something really nice about that. It can also be a real headache because we don't have training in how to do that. I mean, the majority of musicians who get into an orchestra haven't been trained on how to pick beautiful programs for a whole season, or like with finances. We don't know anything about finances.
No.
So you're really thrown in the deep end, like immediately.
Yeah.
And they encourage you to be on committees and really take ownership of your orchestra. So, and that's different than like the way that I've acted here. I feel like I've mainly just learned my parts, and I'll do like promotional things for different concerts. But even that, like, I don't do that myself. I don't even have social media right now. So that's all done through the orchestra, and then I teach. But there's nothing of like, hey, can you help us pick out programs or soloists for 2 seasons from now?
Yeah.
Or finances. So it's totally different.
Yeah. That's cool though. That's cool. I enjoy that. So you've touched on this a little bit earlier, but your season is long. I mean, if you play a 52-week season, like there's some weeks off in there, but I mean, you're playing all the time, right? So you got to reset somehow. You can't just be in your work all the time. You just can't. Like you go crazy. So what do you do to sort of like reset your mind and sort of rebalance yourself where you're not just always clarinet, always practicing, always concerts? Like what are some activities that you do to kind of just take your mind off stuff like that?
Well, something that I started to get into at the end of the time in New Orleans was working out in various ways. First started off with weightlifting, which I was not good at. Still, I'm not good at. And then,
I've never been good at that either, but I still do it.
Wait, yeah, didn't you get really into that?
Yeah, I mean, I still do CrossFit,
but
I do CrossFit, but I don't do it like as much as I used to. My body just can't handle that.
Okay. Yeah. CrossFit is. Oh, actually, the principal horn in the LPO.
Yeah, just like a trainer or something, isn't she?
Exactly. Yeah, she owns CrossFit NOLA, which is New
cool.
Orleans, Louisiana, and she, I probably had this wrong, but she ranked like in the top 10 for the women's category of the national CrossFit competition.
Oh, good for her.
Yeah, like multiple times. She's amazing. So, yeah, I kind of got into working on a little bit there, and that helps clear my mind. And then I went through a breakup 2 summers ago, and I've always wanted to run, but have always gotten really horrible shin splints. So I was already in like so much pain going through that. I was like, what are the shin splints? So, so I picked up running, and I've really enjoyed that. And I find a lot of similarities between practicing and running. It's something that has to be done consistently. If you do it like twice a week, it ends up not feeling nearly the same as like 6-7 times a week. So there's some days you really feel like you can go for it, and then other days that you really need to take it easy. And I feel that is kind of mirrored in my practicing too. You notice the headspace that you're in. I've stopped listening to anything while I go out on runs usually, and that really helps work through a lot of thoughts.
Interesting.
Yeah, quite often I'll start off feeling like shitty about practicing or just about something, and then throughout the run, like usually in the middle, I try to figure out like what the source of the issue is, and then usually by the end, probably it's just like an endorphins thing. I feel a sense of gratitude for all sorts of things at that point. Also, maybe a sense of gratitude that I'm basically done with the run. So,
so how long do you do like half marathons and stuff, or like what's your like, or do you just have like a I do 5 miles a day or whatever? What's your distance kind of?
Sometimes I try to aim for a certain amount of miles a week, and then other times I try to aim for a certain amount of days a week, or I might try to plan some sort of race at some point. And they've all kind of been virtual and just by myself because I picked up running like right before the pandemic. So it's nothing intense, and I could never do it at a competitive level. I just am not good at running in that sort of sense. But it's something that's been really helpful for me in a lot of different
Good.
ways. I used to do yoga a lot. That would help clear my mind. Also, I like socializing a lot. So going out to eat with people in the before times was a big part of unwinding.
We're in the end times now.
Yeah. But even if I don't have time to do stuff like that, learning different music each week, I think helps kind of reset what I'm doing. And luckily, having a job where you play almost every single week is refreshing because there's so many different styles of music that you're doing. It could be a pops one week or opera, ballet, or different sort of subscription concerts. So all of that, I think, kind of helps me stay fresh too. But yeah, there was a period of time where I was fully burnt out after I got tenure here and going through the breakup. And I didn't take a break at all that summer. That was 2019. And then we restarted the season and there was no break at all. Yeah. So, which is my fault. I should have just not done some things in the summer. But at that point for a few months, I really felt kind of burnt out. Like I didn't feel like I had the passion for playing. And the pandemic, stopping playing for like a couple months really re-inspired me and kind of got me back into it. But something else that I do, which feels really cute when I get to do it, is I call a few of my friends and we'll FaceTime and just practice with each other.
Oh, cool.
So I usually call either Anton Rist, you know him, or Taylor Marino. And sometimes even the three of us will just FaceTime and all three of us will practice.
Look at you guys. That is cute. Yeah.
But, you know, it helps get you out of like whatever little funk you're in, because sometimes you hear somebody else and it reignites whatever you're trying to listen for in your own playing, or suddenly you're performing a little bit and that helps communicate again rather than just be like looking for perfection. So it helps get you out of your own little hole that you might create. And it's also just fun to be able to bounce ideas off of other people.
Yeah. It's interesting that you felt burnout because before the pandemic, I felt it big time. This is before the pandemic. I was just like, I don't even know if I want to play anymore. And it's not because I didn't love music. Like I will always love music and always love playing. I was just so in it for such a long time that I just wanted a break. And I was tired of just like the constant grind of just trying to get better and better and better. And I felt like I kept hitting walls and kept hitting walls. And I was like, you know, I remember at one point I told my wife, man, if I could just have like 6 months to just like reset. Sure enough, God has a plan, you know. It's like, but it really did, like, you know, like, I mean, when the pandemic first happened, like I didn't play for probably 2 weeks, which isn't that long of a time, but like even just 2 weeks where I could just chill. And then like another month where I could just like get my bearings. And then I was like, okay, I'll just do this podcast. And it's really like reignited my passion for playing and music and stuff like that. So like now I just like can't wait to get back and start playing again. So, you know, do you ever just take some time off like that where you can just?
Oh, I took a ton of time off. Yeah.
Good.
I would take, luckily I had like a few videos that I had to create for various things. So that would bring me back into playing, but I would take like a month, 6 weeks off. But it was kind of at the point where I wasn't even counting. Like how many days I had not played for at that point, and I would just wait to want to play again, and then do that. Because exactly, you put it perfectly. Once again, it's like you're in it. You're so in it for so long.
I should start a podcast or something.
I mean, that's pretty stressful too. I mean, this is the easy part. Once you do this, then all of the other like production stuff is the challenging stuff.
It's true. It's exactly true.
But yeah, I took a bunch of time off and it felt good.
Yeah. And I think with the auditions too, like, did you ever hit a point, and you can decline to answer this question if you'd like, but did you ever hit a point in your audition taking after you got your job in Louisiana where you're just like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I'm over it.
There were a couple. There was the one that Anton won when he won the Met. And my Like my uncle had just passed away, and then the Met audition had happened, and I just felt really drained after that because it was one of my dreams to play in the Met, and then to not get it and deal with the loss of a family member was a lot. And then I remember showing up to the audition that Joe Morris won in Pacific, and fully not being prepared at all. And like my instrument was breaking in the warm up room before the first round. Like I got no time in the warm up room, and somehow probably only advanced through that round because I wasn't there mentally. You know, that was probably helpful, but obviously didn't make it past that point. So I think that summer, I felt pretty burnt out. But kind of after that, I guess there were a few times where I would get burnt out. There was one summer. Oh yeah, the audition. I think that Bert Hara one in LA. I went to LA auditions like 3 or 4 times, however many times that they've had them. Mm-hmm. I went to all of them except for the one that Boris won, and was swiftly dismissed, like immediately from from all of them. But Andrew Lowy, which one was it? Anyways, so that whole summer, I was like, you know what, I'm going to practice more than anybody else. And I'm sure that I did, because I practiced 9 hours a day for 7 weeks straight. And I would do like 3. There was no way, like there wasn't enough time in the day for anybody else to have practiced more than me at that point. But what happened was I peaked after like 4 weeks. And then it was just steep decline the rest of the time. Yeah. And by the time I got to the audition, I was so nervous and so like completely unprepared somehow. And I took like 40 milligrams of a beta blocker and forgot the E flat back at the hotel. So I was going to say,
you were probably asleep at that point in time.
Yeah, it was like a horse tranquilizer. So, yeah. So, I felt kind of burnt out after that, but no, eventually, I know some people, it's either feast or famine in regards to their audition taking. And for me, it was like feast and then years of famine. And then gradually I would add one thing at a time, and it would kind of remain consistent. So, I was appreciative of that it was like a consistent crescendo back up to getting another job. So by the last couple of years, I was in the finals for stuff most of the time. But it was exhausting because, you know, you would kind of almost expect like, all right, if I'm playing at that level, I'll most likely be in the finals. And then you would hold yourself to that standard. And then each time it'd be like, well, if I don't advance, this is just trash. Like that would be horrible. So, I mean, I feel like we can find we can find tons of ways to make anything exhausting and stressful. So
yeah. Well, that's good that you were able to kind of like reset and just like keep your eyes on like what you wanted, and you're tenured principal clarinetist of a terrific orchestra now, and so that's due to your perseverance in what can only be described as like a really just draining and difficult process. Especially, go ahead.
Having something else to focus on other than auditions was really helpful, though, because I can imagine if I didn't have a job to go back to, then I would have just been focused on like only the failure of that. But when you have a job and you go take an audition, and even if you don't get to the prelims, you go back to your job and you realize that like you can still play with other musicians and you can still communicate and be what you're supposed to be as a performer, is just open and communicative. And it's so easy for us to look at auditions and have them define, like our audition results define who we are as like a total human being. And it's really just one little part of being a musician. It's not even like being a performer necessarily. So it's having something else to go back to would really help reset me and kind of put things into perspective. I don't know if you felt that like when you were in Richmond.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, Richmond was a little bit of a different scenario because I did have a permanent position there, but my full-time position was temporary. And so there was a little bit of a clock ticking. Unfortunately, it worked out, but certainly being in indie, like there's times where I'm just like, should I just like chill and just like, not try to like go after the next thing, because my wife's here, she's got a great job, she's killing it. I like it here. It's a great city. The orchestra's awesome. Like, there's no, there's nothing wrong with that, And I think for so many years, I was just chasing the next big thing. And there are auditions and orchestras that I am interested in, but I think that like having that sort of comfort level of like, okay, if it doesn't work out, I'm certainly no failure. Is it a comforting thing? But at the same time, it's frustrating because you're like, man, I could have, could have been, I could have been a contender. That kind of feeling is always there. You're just like, I've been so close so many times, and I could have been in this orchestra or this orchestra, and it just like didn't quite work out. And am I just like, is this how good I am? Am I just good enough for here? Which is still like, it's really good. There's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? But it's an interesting battle that we fight. And I think we all have our own internal critic that's very good at his or her job. And I think that it's good to take a step back and sort of have perspective on our situation. You know what I mean?
And that critic can really eat away at you and kind of ruin any situation that you're in. There's so many people that we both know that they're in fantastic situations, whether it's teaching or ensembles that they're in, and just can't find a way to enjoy it. I think that there's so many different ways to explain that, but I think just what we have to go through every day when we're trying to get better at anything, that negative self-talk and that voice can really permeate throughout your entire life to the point where it can ruin a great situation. So that is also, I've struggled with that too, of like, how much should you want to move on to the like being principal of the universe orchestra, or like just enjoy where you are and like try to find, make a little nest of love wherever you are, and just try to love the city you're in and find all the good things that make you happy about it. And so but then if you do that, then are you just settling?
Right. That's the thing. Yeah. But then it's like, I think that, and this is my perspective on it, but I think that we all put much more stock into what other people think about us than what anybody actually thinks about us. I know I do for sure. I'm like, oh man, what will my teacher think if I don't get, one of these big bass jobs? It's like, he's just happy for me. He's proud of me. Like, he doesn't care, I mean, he'd be happy for me if I did, but there's no like, so I think that we have to be careful not to put too many of these projections on ourselves and just kind of like, look at it from like, for example, like I know you very well, and you would never look at me and be like, well, Sam's only good enough for the Indianapolis Symphony. Like, you would never, you're like, no, Sam's a killer player and he's great and he'd be great anywhere, and the same thing about you, you know what I mean? Like, there's no, and so I think it's easy for us to like put these sort of projections onto other people, or think that other people are putting them onto us, when in reality, it's just kind of us fighting our own battles. At least that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Well, and the process that we go through in order to get where we are is reliant on other people's approval. So, look, of course, when we speak to ourselves, we use a tone of voice that might be somebody else's, because we're always sort of looking for this random voice of approval. Actually, Ralph Sciano talked to me about this, that the voice that is in his head with self-talk, self-criticism, is not his own voice. And it took him a really long time to realize that. And until he said that, I'd never thought about whose voice is it that's actually in my head. Unfortunately, I do think sometimes it's my own voice.
At least you could talk yourself out of it then.
Yeah.
Well, cool, Chris. So looking back, is there anything that like you wish you would have done differently, like to this point in your career? Are you like, you know what, like I'll go first once again, just to not put you on the spot, but like for me, I just wish I would have given myself a break more, like not in terms of like a break from the instrument, just a break from the just like constant destruction of, because that's how we are as musicians. We're like, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough, this needs to be better. Like, I wish I would have just like been like, you know what, like you sound good, you're a world-class player, like just, you sound good, you should be proud of yourself. So that's my regret, at least to this point. And I'm trying to be better about that, but It's hard.
Um, I definitely identify with that, and there are plenty of situations in my own life that I'm sure I could have just been released things a little bit more. I mean, that goes back to the first thing that we were talking about
Yeah,
of
definitely.
trying to find a balance. Oh man, I don't know. I feel like there are so many things that I probably could have done differently. I guess maybe one thing early on was I really tried to, in my own playing, just imitate my teacher the whole time, and that really derailed me.
Mm.
It wasn't anybody else's fault. It's not like he taught me incorrectly or taught me bad habits, but um, whether it was the visual, like looking at his embouchure, I would try to imitate his embouchure, or the way he sat, or like his hands, or whatever, or his musical choices. And I think in doing all of that, I ended up not developing any personality or my own thoughts about how things should go, and would just think, oh, what would Manassi do in this situation? And I think that kind of set me back for a little while.
Mm.
So, I mean, there are tons of personal things that I wish I would have done differently too. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, situations where you wish that you could be kinder or nicer to other people, or more forgiving of other people. Um, but I kind of have this thing where I look back on a situation where I think that I messed up, and I'm like, why did I have to make that mistake to learn that lesson? And it's just kind of become a motive throughout my life. It's like, I mean, I should have been able to know that would have been a mistake to do, but unfortunately, I had to make that mistake in order to learn to hopefully not do that again.
Hmm.
So that's a very general comment, but those are probably the two main things.
Those are great things, and
Um,
I think that you know we all have something we wish we could have done differently, and it's good to look back and not beat yourself up over it, but just kind of like, okay, these are things I could be better at moving forward.
yeah, it's hard because I do, on one hand, wish that I hadn't done blank, but then also at the same time, that thing taught me this lesson, so that so I don't fully wish that it didn't happen.
Hmm.
I like, I wish whatever the effect, like the thing that happened from that blank, wouldn't have happened. But I'm glad that I have that knowledge now, and I went through that. So it's a weird dichotomy,
Yeah.
and it's kind of, you can't get rid of it. So it, also learning to not beat myself up, just like what you just said. Eventually, having to forgive yourself for whatever you feel like you messed up on, is really important. And I used to get in the car as like a third grader, and my mom would pick me up from school, and I would just tell her everything I did wrong immediately. And it got to the point where she would be like, "You have to tell me two good things first. Like, did you like in recess baseball, did you hit a home run?" Like, even something like that. But I'd be like, "No, that the teacher told me to stop talking," or like, I did this other thing that was really terrible. And so I've always had a guilty conscience throughout my my life.
That's funny. That's awesome, man. But I'm glad that first of all, it's great to have you. I just
Yeah, it's
it's
nice to be
been
here.
a long time since we've caught up, and I'm glad that you
Yeah,
were able to join me for this. And I think we had a really nice discussion about all this stuff. It's really important for people
yeah,
to hear that, like, it's not all like sunshine and rainbows. Like, there's some tough lessons along the way, and you're gonna make
hmm,
mistakes, and those mistakes are okay. And it's better that you learn them when you make them, and then you know improve on them moving forward than beating yourself up over it. So I think it's really important for people to hear, especially coming from someone like you.
yeah. I mean, we're all very human, and just because you have a certain position doesn't mean that that you're above making mistakes. So,
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
maybe that was one thing that I would want to change. That, like, when I was younger, I would just really um, idolize whoever was in like an equivalent position to wherever I am now. Like, I would look at people that taught at whatever music festival I was going to, or at Juilliard, and wow, they're the principal of the Met, and or the New York Phil. Like, they're a god basically. And I wish I had done less of that. I think it was unhealthy for me to think like that. And I think it permeates throughout classical music to do that, but maybe it's just like an American thing of holding on to titles of jobs. I don't know. It's an ego-related thing. So, but yeah, as we've been talking about, we're just regular people who make mistakes who happen to get a certain position in an orchestra.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that just got dark. Sorry.
No, that's not dark at all. No, that's not dark at all. I think that's good. That's good for you to point that out. And I think that's, one of my goals with the podcast was just like, I wanted to bring on a bunch of my friends who I know to just be cool, regular people. And I think I've done that. And I think I've sort of stripped back this, like you said, this title. Like when people see you, if they don't know you, they know you as the principal clarinetist of the Cincinnati Symphony, right? That's what you are. But you're just Chris, That's what you'll always be Chris to me. You'll be Chris sitting on the Tanglewood lawn drinking a beer together. Like that's what I know you as,
Yeah.
And so it's cool for people to see that side of you and that side of me and that side of all my guests, because it really kind of strips down that barrier that we all have. And like you said, I think that's an important lesson that you learned is like, it's not about that title or that idolization. It's just about the people behind it, Yeah.
Yeah. And we all go through very similar things, and we all go through this process, this really tumultuous process of trying to get a job or relationships outside of the orchestra or just growing up experiences. So how to have a family, you're married now, and how to be a good partner to whoever you're with. So, yeah, I mean, it's great that you do this, and very nice of you to have me on. And
yeah, absolutely, man. Hey, before you leave though, do you have any like shout outs or anyone you want to thank, or any last pieces of advice? I feel like you've had a whole podcast full of advice, but if you have anything else you want to share, you're welcome to share that.
Anything I want to share? I don't know. Try FaceTiming with your friends and practice with them.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun, and you feel like very warm when you do it, and it's super cute. It's a lot of fun. It can help you get out of whatever little rut you might be in. And as you said, be easier on yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome, Chris.
I guess that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it was so awesome to have you, and so awesome to catch up. And because we're neighbors now, when the world isn't exploding anymore, we'll have to meet up and hang out a little bit, because you're only a stone's throw away from me, so that'll be fun.
I know, it's like 90 minutes.
Yeah. Barely a drive. So you could run here. You could make a day out of it. Well, buddy, thanks so much for being here, and it was great to have you.
Thanks. It was nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you haven't had the chance already, please be sure to stop by our website at candidclarinetistpodcast.com, where you can find more information about myself, the podcast, and links to all of our content platforms. We're very close to 700 followers on Instagram, so I would love it if you would just head over to our Instagram page and just give our page a follow. I post fairly frequently, though I've been a little negligent recently. So, but still fun. I like to do a lot of interactive things and asking questions and whatnot to our followers. So give us a like and help us get over that 700 followers mark. Once again, I am Sam Rothstein, and thanks for tuning in to the Candid Clarinetist podcast.